Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Internet Computer Developer Journey. My name is Jessie, and this is episode 0.6, Introduction to DFX. For this tutorial, we're going to be following along with the developer documentation that corresponds to this video. So to find that, you're going to navigate to the Internet Computer Developer Docs. Once you're there, you're going to go to Tutorials, and then from the index page of the tutorial section, you're going to scroll down to the level 0 pre-flight operations and then select Introduction to DFX, which is 0.6. So in this tutorial, we're going to get an introduction to DFX, which is a command line utility that's used to interact with the Internet Computer SDK. This is the primary tool that's used for creating, managing, and deploying decentralized applications on the Internet Computer. So we're going to take a look at how to use DFX to create a new project. Then we're going to go through the default files and subdirectories that are part of the template project that is deployed for every new project created with DFX. And then we're also going to take a look at the default file for a backend canister that is created as part of that template. So to get started, the DFX parent command is the 3 letters DFX. To use DFX, you're going to start every command with those 3 letters, then you're going to use a space, and then you're going to use whatever subcommand that is intended for the workflow. Lastly, if there are any flags that you're going to use, they're going to be at the end of the syntax for the command. So as a quick example, we're going to check the version of DFX, and we're also going to take a look at using a simple ping command to ping connectivity to the Internet Computer mainnet or the local canister execution environment. So to get started, we're going to have the tutorial open in one window, and then we're going to have a command line interface open in another window. For my workspace, I have put these windows right next to each other, but if you have multiple monitors or if you have a different workflow that you prefer visually, go ahead and set up your screens as you are comfortable with. And then we're going to navigate into our developer journey directory that we created in module 0.3, creating our developer environment. So in that module where we set up our developer environment, we created a developer journey subdirectory. And so to open that, you can either use the command line to navigate to that subdirectory, or you can open the Finder UI and navigate to the parent directory where that subdirectory is. So for example, the parent directory for me is my home directory, which by default is my username. And then the developer journey is shown as a subdirectory within this parent directory. So to navigate into that directory, we can use the command line, and we're going to use the command cd, which stands for change directory. And then we're just going to click and drag that over into our command line window. So it's going to give us the full file path to that subdirectory. And then we're going to select enter in order to run that command. And then you can see that our command line prompt has changed from the tilde character, which is used in macOS and Linux distribution systems in order to represent the home directory, and we can see that now it reflects our subdirectory of the developer journey folder. We can also confirm that this file path users / your username / developer journey, we can confirm that that's our full file path by using the command pwd, which stands for print working directory, and we can see that that is the full file path reflected there. So now to get started with DFX, we're going to first confirm that DFX has been installed, and we're also going to confirm the version of DFX that has been installed. So at the time of this video's recording, the latest version of DFX is 0.15.1, which is very important for moving forward in this developer journey, since we're going to be utilizing a lot of features that are only available in version 0.15.1 and newer. So we want to make sure that that is the version we have installed. So we're going to use the command dfx, and then we're not going to use a subcommand to check the version. We're just going to use the flag version. So that is 2 hyphens and then the word version following the DFX characters. And then we'll select enter to run that command. And we can see that our current version of DFX is 0.15.1. So next we're going to first ping our local execution environment, or the local instance of our replica, and make sure that that is up and running and available for us to use to deploy things locally. And then we're also going to ping the IC mainnet to make sure that we have connectivity to the mainnet for when we go to deploy canisters onto the mainnet. So to ping our local execution environment, you first want to make sure that DFX is running if it isn't already running. So we're going to want to use the command dfx start. And then for this instance, we're going to use the flag background in this command, because otherwise the output of the dfx start command is going to give us continuous output that will prevent us from running commands further within this terminal window. So using that command background is just going to say that we don't want the continuous output within this window, and it's just going to run in the background. So we're going to use that dfx start command, and then we're going to see some output indicating that dfx start is running for version 0.15.1, which is correct since we just verified that our DFX version is 0.15.1. And we're also going to see that we have the replica, the local instance of the replica initialized, and then we're going to get a dashboard link. And if we open this in a browser window, so we're just going to copy that URL and paste it, we have our local version of the Internet Computer replica running, and we can see some information about the local instance. And so again, this is a local execution environment. This is not reflective of the Internet Computer mainnet and the replica version that is running on the mainnet. This is just the local version we're going to be using for our local development. So if we want to now ping that local replica, we're going to use the dfx ping command. For this command, if we are just using dfx ping and we aren't specifying anything further, it's going to ping that local replica that is now running. And we're going to get some information back about the version and the replica status. And then we can also compare that information to the information that is running in the dashboard window we have open. So we can see that the replica version is 0.8, and in this output here, it's also 0.8. And we can also get some other information about the root key and the certified height. So some other information that is beneficial for troubleshooting things relating to the local replica. Then if we want to ping the mainnet network to make sure that we have connectivity there, we can use the dfx ping command followed by IC. So this is specifying that we want to now ping the IC, and that is referring to the Internet Computer mainnet network. So then we're going to run that, and you can see that our output is slightly different. It's not showing us the version in this instance, and it's going to show us a different root key value. So moving forward, we are going to clear the screen so that we have a fresh terminal window to work with. And then we are going to jump into creating a new project with DFX. And so in the tutorial document, there are some instructions for upgrading to the latest version of DFX. So if you are currently running a older version of DFX, like I said, we will need to have 0.15.1 installed. And so there are some instructions for how to upgrade to the latest version. And then there's also some instructions for installing a specific version of DFX. So if there is a specific version that has features that you want to use, maybe it is an older version for a specific workflow or something of that nature, there are also instructions in this document on how to install that specific version. But for this video walkthrough, we're going to jump right into creating a new project with DFX. So we're going to want to make sure that we are still in this developer journey directory, since that's where we are going to create all of our projects in this developer journey just to keep them all in one place, not to interfere with any other independent projects you have outside of this directory. And so we can use that pwd command just to reaffirm that that is the directory that we are working in. And then we're going to use the dfx new command followed by the name of our project. So this can be any name that is using alphanumeric characters that include an underscore. So hyphens are not supported in this project name field, but underscores are. So for our first project, we're going to call it hello_world. You can name this anything that you'd like, but for simplicity and cohesivity following along with this tutorial, we're going to call it hello world. And by default, with no other flags or arguments in this command, this is going to create a new Motoko project using the DFX default template for Motoko projects. Now, if we wanted to create a Rust project instead, we could use the flag Rust after our project name, and that would then use the default Rust project template. But this developer journey is going to focus on Motoko development, and a future developer journey will focus on Rust development. So for this tutorial specifically, we are going to just use this dfx new followed by the hello world project name command, and then we are not going to specify any other flags because we want the default Motoko project. So we're going to hit enter, and then we're going to see some feedback for the different processes that are happening once we have indicated that we want to create this new project. So we can see that there are a variety of files created. We have a hello world backend main.mo file. We have some hello world front end files. And then we also have an environment file, a package.json file, a webpack.config.js file. So those are some of the files that we will be taking a look at. And then now that we have created those files, this prompt just gives us some additional information, like a link to the quick start guide, a link to the Motoko language guide, a couple other resources that are easily referenceable right here from the command's output. And then we have some instructions for getting started with this new project that we've just created. So we can see that we can now navigate into the hello world directory that we've created. So let's go ahead and do that. So cd hello_world. And then we can then use the pwd command to now print this new directory that we're in. And we can see that we are still in the developer journey parent directory, but now we're in this new subdirectory called hello world. So now that we are in the directory for our newly created project, our directory is going to be filled with several default files that DFX has created for us using that Motoko default project template. So to take a look at some of them, we can use the ls command, which is for listing files within the directory that we are currently in. And if we just use ls and then press enter, we can see the names of the different files that are in this directory, but you'll notice that some of these do not have a file extension, and that's because those are subdirectories. And so we can get a little bit more information by using the ls-l command, which is going to list the files in a longer version. That -l flag stands for long. So here we can see that we have two subdirectories, node modules, and it's indicated by this D in the beginning of the listing for that file. So we can see that node modules is a directory, and we can also see that source is a directory. And so we can take a look in the documentation tutorial for this walkthrough. There is a condensed version of this. There's a condensed version of the files and subdirectories that are in this default template. Since this node modules directory is quite lengthy since it has a lot of sub-files for different node modules that are included by default. And if we were to use the tree command, so the tree command is used to look at all of the files and subdirectories and their subdirectories within the current working directory. If we use that tree command, we can see that we get a lot of output, and not all of this is things that we want to have in the forefront of our mind. We are mostly focused on the files within this source or SRC directory, and we're also looking for this dfx.json file, since this is the project's configuration file, and this file is very important moving forward. We're going to be using this file a lot since it contains the canister definitions for all of our canisters within the project. So like I said, on the documentation for this, there is kind of a condensed version of all of this tree output. And then we also have a breakdown of the important files and directories that we'll be looking at. And so the default template that DFX used to create this project includes a readme.md file. So this is pretty standard for programming projects in general, to have a readme file that is used for documenting your project. That dfx.json file, like I said, is the configuration file for the project, and it's very important. That SRC directory or source directory that I mentioned is the directory that's going to contain all of your source files for all of your canisters, and thus your entire decentralized application. All of those files will be in this source directory. By default, there is a backend canister directory, and so it will always be pre-appended with the name of your project. And so in this case, we called our project Hello World. So this is the Hello World backend source directory, and that's going to contain all of the source code for our backend canisters. There's also a front-end source directory, and that contains all of the source code for our decentralized applications front-end canister. And then we are going to look closely at the default Motoko file that is included for that backend canister. And so that file by default is hello_world_backend/main.mo. And that is where you can modify or replace the code to include your decentralized applications programming logic. For simplicity, in the beginning of our developer journey, that is going to be the only file that we edit for the backend canisters. But as our projects get more involved and more complex, we will be creating other backend canisters in addition to that default one. But for now, we're just going to take a look at what that default code looks like. Before we jump into that though, we're going to review the default project configuration. So like I mentioned, that configuration is located in the dfx.json file, and that's going to contain an automatically generated configuration setup for this default project. So it's going to make it so if you didn't want to edit this project at all, you just wanted to deploy this default template, it's going to have everything configured so that you can deploy this default template, which is just a simple Hello World template by default. Whether the project was called Hello World or not, it's always going to be a Hello World default project. And so this dfx.json file is going to contain the configuration that will let us just deploy this template as is. So by default, this project is going to have this code for the dfx.json file. It's reflected in the tutorial, but we can also take a look at this ourselves in the command line if we use the cat command. So cat is short for concatenate, and it's going to just display the contents of the file in the command line for us. So we aren't going to be editing the file. We aren't going to be in a file editor or a code editor. We are just essentially printing the contents of the file to the command line. So we're going to use cat, and then we're going to type dfx.json. and that's going to just print out exactly what is reflected in the tutorial here, since by default it's always going to be the exact same unless there is a different project name that you specified. So if instead of calling this hello world with an underscore, if you called it hello world as just one string of text without that underscore, that would be reflected in all of these instances where hello underscore world is. Or if you called it something entirely different, like my project 1, that would be the only difference in this dfx.json file by default, since again, it's a template file that is used for all Motoko projects. So if we want to take a look at exactly what this project's configuration file is defining, we can see that it starts off with an entry called canisters. And in that entry for canisters, we can see that hello world backend canister. This is pointing to that default main.mo file that I mentioned that's located in that src/hello world backend subdirectory. And so that is the default location that it's going to be looking in for the source code for that backend canister. And it's also defining that this canister is a It is also defining that this canister is a Motoko canister, so it is expecting this source code to be written in Motoko, and it is, since it uses the .mo file extension. Then we can see that our front-end canister is also defined, and we can see that it has a dependency defined, and so its dependency is the backend canister. So this dependency indicates that this front-end canister, in order for it to be running and deployed, this backend canister first needs to be running as well. So when we go to deploy our project in a future tutorial, this backend canister is going to be deployed first, and if there are any errors that cause this backend canister to fail and it isn't able to be deployed, this front-end canister will then not be able to be deployed either, since it is dependent on the backend canister running. We can see that the front-end canister has this entry called front-end, and it's pointing to an entry point, and you can see that this entry point points to a file called index.html, which is fairly standard for front ends of applications to have an index.html file be at the root of the front end, since that is typically where the user interface files are stored and configured to be displayed. And then we can see that there's also an entry called source. And so these are two additional directories that this front-end canister is going to look in order to find additional assets. And we can see that that's indicated by this default subdirectory called assets. And then we can also see it in this additional directory. Lastly, for this canister, we can see that its type is defined as assets. So that's a little bit different from our backend canister that has the type defined as Motoko. This one is type assets, since this is an asset canister or a front-end canister. So this is just telling the configuration that this is going to be the canister that is the user-facing canister. This is going to hold the UI and other visual assets used to interact with the backend source code in the backend canister. And then at the bottom of this configuration file, we're just going to see a couple additional arguments. There isn't anything specific that has been configured. The only real specific default that is configured on the bottom here is just that the environmental variable file is stored at .env. So that is the breakdown of the dfx.json file, and like I said, moving forward, this is a very important file. It is going to be something that we edit quite a bit in future tutorials and that we get very familiar with using. So lastly, we're going to take a look at the default code for the backend canister. So like I mentioned, it is this file here stored at src/hello_world_backend/main.mo. And so I'm just going to copy this file name here, and then I'm going to use that cat file again to just print the content of that file to the terminal, and then I'm going to paste in that file path. And so we can see that the content is now reflected in our terminal window, and we can see that it reflects the exact content that is included in the tutorial. And so this is a simple Hello World program. Like I mentioned, whether this program was called Hello World when we use the dfx new command or not, by default, this is always going to be the default code that is in the main.mo file, regardless of what the project's name is. So in this main.mo file, we first have this word actor, and this defines an actor, which can be compared to the main function that other programming languages may define. In Motoko, the main function is implicit in the file itself, so all Motoko pieces of code start with this definition of an actor. And remember that canisters can only define one actor per canister, and so this is going to be the definition for the actor for this canister. So instead of a traditional Hello World program that just prints the words Hello World to the terminal, this version of Hello World defines an actor that has a function called greet, and this function is public. And so this means that this function can be called by anyone. There are no limits to who is able to query this canister to call this function. And this function is going to take an input of type text, and the input is going to be saved as a variable called name. And we can see that is defined here in these parentheses, that this is the name of the variable, and then this is the type text. And then we use the async keyword to indicate that the program is going to return an asynchronous message that consists of this text string here, which is the word hello, followed by a comma and a space, and then we input that variable name. So whatever the name that was inputted when this function was called, whatever is stored in that name variable is going to be inputted here. So it's ultimately going to return hello, and then if I put my name here, it would return hello, Jesse, and then it would end with an exclamation point. And so in a future tutorial, we are going to deploy this canister, and then we will call this function and input a string of text to return a name. But for today's video, that is going to wrap things up. And all of that might be a bit confusing, but no worries. We are going to explore all of this in depth further in future tutorials. We will cover everything from actor objects, classes, and asynchronous messages in the Motoko fundamentals level. And we will also cover deploying and interacting with canisters in a future tutorial as well. But for today's tutorial, that's going to wrap things up. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the DFINITY YouTube channel in order to be notified when the next episode of the developer journey is released. You can find the link to the corresponding tutorial for this video in the video description below, as well as a link to our developer community on Discord, the developer forum, and the forum thread for the developer journey series, so you can leave feedback, comments, and questions. And you can also interact with us in the YouTube comments of this video as well. I'll see everyone next time. Take care.